Meeting come to order. Today is Tuesday, December 20th, 2016. It's a study session of the Prescott City Council. Roll call, please.
Mayor Oberg.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Lamerson.
Here.
Councilman Blair. Here. Councilman Lozelle.
Here.
Councilwoman Orr.
Here.
Councilman Shiska.
Here.
Councilwoman Wilcox.
Here.
All present.
Well, I want to thank everybody that wanted to come in today and listen to our study session and took time out of your busy day. We got a pretty full session here, so we're going to get right into it. There may be a couple things here I don't know that I'll allow some public comment on. We'll have to see how the discussion goes and the time. First item, please.
Item A, presentation and discussion of revisions to the commercial and residential trash and recycling services and for transfer station disposal fees. This item was continued from the meeting of December 13th, 2016.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Willie Black. I'm the solid waste superintendent here at the city. And I'm presenting today the proposed fee increase that you'll be considering at the regular voting meeting this afternoon. Just a little item of clarification, not for the mayor and council, but for the audience or those who might be watching. The Solid Waste Fund is an enterprise fund supported by user fees, not supported by the general fund. Our annual operating budget is just over $8 million, and our revenue that we're expected to bring in FY17 is just under $7 million. Solid waste fee has not been increased for more than a decade, and you might want to ask, well, why didn't we increase the fee for so long? Well, we didn't need to. What actually happened was our reserves were 100% of our operating budget, so we didn't need a fee increase to do that. The reason the fee got so high, or the fund balance got so high, is prior decisions to delay the capital projects and replacement equipment. Those decisions were made, but we can't continue as a strategy for the future. And just a little bit of point of clarification for everyone about our fund balance. We have two parts to our fund balance, a restricted reserve and unrestricted reserve. The restricted reserve is what we were required as financial assurance for our landfill. The landfill officially closed February 2nd of 2002, and we're required to maintain that final cap for 30 years. We've got about 16 plus years left that we have to maintain that, and the engineer's estimate is just over $1.4 million, and that's in 2016 dollars. What we're expecting, I want to get through the next monsoon season to see if we have a breach in the landfill and make sure that the trash stays where it's supposed to stay. And if everything holds, next year when we bring the fee increase to the council, we're thinking that we can possibly have that maintenance fee go away for the residential and commercial businesses.
Okay, we got a question, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Question, since you're the guy in charge of that particular part of the department, could you clarify, it's an enterprise fund. The ratepayers maintain financially the enterprise fund. In the budget, are the staff members assigned to the enterprise fund? That means like you. Is there a portion or your salary, the pay that is directed for the employees come out of the enterprise fund?
Mayor Pro Tem, all of the salaries, everything's included in the enterprise fund.
Thank you very much.
The division worked with a CPA firm that was familiar with fee forecasting for municipalities, and our projections allow us with the model to determine if a fee increase is needed for future years to cover our cost and make sure that we have a fund balance available there. The new law that was passed August 6th of 2016 requires us to give a 60-day notice to commercial businesses of the increase, and we thought it was we thought it was a good idea to be transparent and include the residential customers as well. We posted the fee increase information on the website October 12th, which satisfies the requirement of the new legislation. The three most expensive costs we have for a solid waste operation, of course, personnel, equipment, and disposal. Costs for salaries and benefits, we all know, continue to rise. The division continues to work with fleet services to make sure we maximize the useful life of our collection vehicles. Our fleet manager last week in his presentation, Mike Carr, talked about the replacement cycle of our trucks and how that was changing. In the past, it had been recommended to replace at 5 years. He's up the replacement to 7 years, and actually the average life of our collection vehicles is about 8.5 years. And by the time a truck goes out of service, it's 12 years or older. Our oldest collection vehicle on the road right now is a 2003, and it's difficult to maintain those trucks, as Mike had pointed out last week. When you've got a source parts and you've got to replace things. You can't predict a lot of those things that happen. The next item we have is hauling and disposal costs. Those continue to rise each year. Both of our hauling and disposal contracts have annual escalators related to this consumer price index. Those are good things to have because that protects you that the prices aren't going to go up higher than what typically the costs are. Just a little bit of reference. Our disposal contract, since it was renewed in 2005, those costs have went up 12%. And our hauling contract that was just approved last week, since the original contract, our costs have gone up 11%. We try to do everything we can at the transfer station to divert material from going into the landfill. We try to divert material from going into the landfill. We try to recycle as much as we can, the metal, electronics, brush, and inert debris. The inert debris is probably the largest item that we're able to recycle, and just for inert debris is stuff that won't decompose at a landfill. So that's the important thing that you want to keep out of the landfill. We make a good quality product out of that. The material is ground by a private contractor, and we're able to reuse the material within the community. The same thing with the brush. With the grinder, the council approved a little over a year ago to purchase, which thank you for the purchase. That's a fantastic piece of equipment. We're able to move through that brush pile pretty quickly. We don't have to wait for somebody to come in and move the material for us. About 65,000 tons a year we have coming into the transfer station, and as I mentioned with the diversion, we're diverting about 29% away from going into the landfill. The customer impact, it's important to note that all customers utilizing curbside service will see about a 7% increase in their monthly charge. What do they get for that monthly charge? The monthly charge, customer gets twice a week collection. They get one trash and one recycle collection a week. They get household hazardous waste collection. They get the free, they get the bulk collection, the annual free brush days. There's a lot of things that go into that rate that the customers get as a benefit, that when you take a look at private service providers in the area, the only thing that they offer typically is once a week collection, and that's it. And we did an informal survey just to see what surrounding communities people pay for private service. And it's about $15.58 is the average of what they pay. So we're still going to be below the average here. Customers utilizing metal bin collection, they're going to see about a 10% increase in their rate. Commercial customers have an advantage. They can also recycle. If they can recycle the material that's going into the trash container, they get about a half of the cost for the trash if they have a recycle bin. It's half the cost per cubic yard. Transfer station customers, the increase will be about $4 per ton, going from 59 to 63. And what we're going to do this time we're recommending is those customers that bring in clean brush, we don't have to do any sorting. We don't have to pull it from the piles or anything like that. We're going to actually, we'd like the rate to remain the same. This gives people a financial incentive. If you come into the gate with the material clean, you get the lower rate of $59 a ton. The financial aspects, if council approves this afternoon, for the next 5 months of the year, we're estimating about $170,000 in revenue, about $350,000 annually. And with the new fee forecast model, as we come back each year, the council, you'll be used to the forecast model we're using, and it'll be able to tell if we need an increase or not. And the process will ensure we have financial stability within the solid waste division. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
Councilman Blair?
A couple. First is for the city manager. Mr. Lamerson introduced the fact that the fees that our employees in those divisions are coming not out of the general fund but out of the secured fund. When it goes to us giving our employees a raise, does that same thing? It comes out of that secured fund?
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does.
Okay, the whole amount?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Wilcox?
Why is the increase for metal containers higher than the increase for curbside?
Mayor, Councilman Wilcox, what we did is we looked at the fee forecast, and we've got to recover. Typically, this is service that could be provided by a private hauler. We want to make sure that it's self-supporting, so we need the higher increase to cover those costs.
The metal containers are the dumpsters,
Correct.
and they cost more to empty those. Is that what you're saying?
The cost for the recycling is not paying for itself on the commercial side. So you have to offset it with the cost for the solid waste, and that's why the fee is higher.
What about residential areas that have dumpsters?
Those will go up as well.
Councilman Lozelle?
Thank you, Mayor. Have we, who was it, Jim and Steve, when was the last time that we did a study to see what it would cost to privatize?
I'm going to guess probably 12 years ago. We went out and found that basically there's no way that our citizens could get the quality of service that they get if we went to the private sector, alluding to the fact of, neighborhood free dump days when they put off roll-off bins and the Christmas tree pickups. Sure. And the every now and then call-ins where somebody's dropped a couch in your neighborhood. Those kind of things, you have to keep in the back of your mind. As Lamerson always keeps pointing out, the reason why people come here is because we have a clean and neat city, and we've always pushed that. And going with a private hauler, based upon our last time we checked, we couldn't even get close to what the city of Prescott provides that service for.
And I'm not questioning the folks over in solid waste. They do a fine job, and I know a lot of them. But I do represent the public, and I'm just wondering if we should look at doing our due diligence like we did with the golf course and see if it can be done cheaper.
And I think that's probably not a bad idea, but one of our core services is trash and sanitation, which really kind of is different than a golf course or a restaurant. Probably not a bad idea, but I'd just like to suggest that, based upon some of the things that I see where we could save money, is a simple fact, and maybe Stephanie has an excuse for it, but by putting all our trash receptacles on one side of the road instead of both sides of the road that cause those trucks to go up and down the road on both sides instead of one side would be a question that I'd ask. It seemed like we're expending more fuel going up the hill and then coming down the hill and picking up the same containers. So that'd be a suggestion to y'all.
Thank you.
Well, you're next, Councilman Blair.
I think I just said it. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, Greg, I got on there.
Councilman Shiska.
Thanks, Mayor. As far as privatization, if we were sitting here saying, should we go into the trash business, I'd say absolutely not. But that's assuming that we have a number of private haulers who are doing it right now, and we would enter into the fray, and I would say no way. From the other standpoint, do we need to stay in the trash business? I believe we do. And I think that the city does a marvelous job with what we have.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Wilcox.
I think the city does a marvelous job too, but when I watch the process take place, because I live right next to a dumpster, there are two big trucks that come along the street, and then just down the street, there's another solid waste hauler that uses our public street, and down another street, there's a third solid waste hauler. It seems very inefficient to me, at least for the city, to be using two trucks. So I'm wondering if you're looking at, in the long-term future, changing the type of pickup mechanism you have from two trucks to one truck and having a different sorting mechanism.
Mayor, Councilwoman Wilcox, that is things that I'm looking at. I arrived here in July. Just a little bit of background. I've got about over 35 years of experience in solid waste, and routing is one of the things that I'd like to take care of. We're looking at different things with commercial routing that could save us some money. It's called zoned routing. It's a concept that not a lot of people caught on to, but it's done the same thing as residential. I look at those same things that you look at. One of the things that bothered me even before I lived in the city was the UPS store and the 300-gallon container that sat on the street. that container is no longer sitting on the street. When a lot of cities went to automation, there was no place for these things to fit, and one size doesn't fit all, so they had to make things work. There's routes that the truck goes up and down the alley twice, and what I'm familiar with is you go down the alley once. And you have to have the right size of containers to be able to do that. So I've got a lot of work to do in the next, hopefully, several years. Routing is very important. Routing is something that you do all the time. And if you've got a particular street you'd like me to take a look at, I can take a look at. As far as another private service provider working in the street, there's nothing I can do about that. I can do something about ours.
Well, I'm glad to know you're looking at efficiencies, 'cause I think that's important.
Yes.
Councilwoman Orr?
Yes, my concern, and I've been listening to comments and people calling on the radio, is the concern about so many trucks on the road. So if you, like in Prescott Valley, they have many trucks, private trucks going up and down the same roads, and the damage that would do to our, to our roads. And I believe it would, because they're very heavy. I just have a question about clean brush. So the clean brush is basically nothing with it, just clippings, cuts. What do you mean by clean brush?
Clean brush, where we get some people that want to dump the trash off with, they've cleaned up, done a yard cleanup, and they
Okay.
throw the lunch debris in there, and they don't want to
Gotcha.
clean that stuff
Okay.
out. We do have containers that we're not going to be unreasonable, is you can put the stuff in the container we have available.
So as long as it's clean, there's no rate hike on this?
Correct.
Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. Kind of tagging on to Councilman Lazell, Councilman Blair, and Councilwoman Wilcox to some degree. We have 6 basic services, and I'm a basic service guy. And again, for edification of not only staff but the public, it's police, fire, roads, water, sewer, and trash. Fortunately, we've been able to come up with enterprise funds, self-sufficient, for at least 3 of those funds. Potentially roads with a dedicated revenue source, that being the 1-cent sales tax that is restricted to street improvements and the ancillary components that go along with the streets, such as sidewalks, etc., stuff like that. And while I realize we have 2 other enterprise funds, one of them probably non-essential, and one of them depends on who you're talking to with regards to the federal government, with regards to the airport and essential service and all that other stuff, and a golf course. The golf course, of course, is a non-essential service, but it's an enterprise fund, supposedly self-supporting. I support our staff. I support our enterprise fund system. And I hope at some point we're able to encapsulate a mechanism so police and fire are not totally dependent on a general fund that's in competition with such non-essential services as parks and recreation, etc., in the budget system every year. You guys do a great job, and I think for the amount of money this community has invested in our trash service, we would be very foolish at this time frame to look at going out and trying to provide the service unless, of course, we can find some place that could do exactly the same kind of service level we expect as taxpayers and citizens for the same kind of revenue that we're spending. I would say that about our water delivery. I would say that about our roads. I would say that about everything. And one of the things about our roads, because of the bidding process, it is kind of privatized. We don't necessarily, and I know we go out and do some patchwork in an emergency situation, but you don't see city employees out there constructing roads. We put those out for bid, and the taxpayers pay it with a street fund. So I just wanted to throw that in there so the public has a little bit of an understanding how the system works. I appreciate who you are, and thanks for joining the team.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Councilman Blair?
One thing I didn't share on that last survey that we did do, and thank you, Stephanie, the fact that we're not flatlanders, we're hilltoppers.
Yeah.
And the city has gone to every extent possible to have special trash vehicles that go up on the hillsides and everything else, because you can't get a common trash truck there, and that was not available, by the way, when we went out for RFP and RFQ from other companies because they had to put on special equipment. So again, going back and talking about the specialization of our trash hauling, it's not just about picking up trash and recycle. It's about neighborhood cleanups, Christmas trees, dumping the stuff that we do at the transfer station once a year when it comes to chemicals, all that kind of stuff. So I think our trash people, not that means that they're trashy people, but our trash people have gone above and beyond in this community to make it a clean community, and I appreciate that. Even going to the fact of having covered loads that go to our waste disposal area, as long as we don't consider concrete as being a coverable load.
Councilwoman Orr?
I just wanted to make a comment because we've talked a lot about customer service, and I appreciate your staff and what they do on the customer service side, because they do have customers, and they're very polite, and anytime I've been over there, they've been very helpful, so I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Wilcox?
One more question. For the transfer station customers who are volunteers who do the roadside cleanups, do we charge them also?
You're talking about like litter lifters?
Yes.
No, they tell us where the bags are at, and we can go and pick them up at no charge.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? I'll take a couple from the public if there's any desire.
Mayor, I have one question.
Go ahead.
Have we received any letters of opposition for this rate increase?
I've not seen any.
Haven't gotten any back.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Have their hidden.
Next item.
Item B, water allocation and development of Granite Dells Estates.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Leslie Grazer, Water Resource Manager for the City of Prescott. I'm going to work from the agenda memo a little bit again this time for this topic. The focus of this study session presentation and discussion is on the allocation of water for the build-out of a master plan development. I'll provide the introduction, and then it will be followed by remarks from the property owner and his representative. So Mr. Fan is present as well as Mr. Holt today. The Granite Dells, referring to this picture so we get started in the right spot. The Granite Dells Estates is a 1,142 acre master plan development located south of Granite Dells Parkway and State Route 89A. So this is 89 and 89A with the Granite Dells Parkway right here. The annexation of the property occurred in 2007, which included a water service agreement supporting implementation of the master plan. A rezoning of rezoning of 550 acres was subsequently approved in 2008, followed in 2013 by approval of the master plan amendment providing a maximum of 1,310 residential units, another rezoning and amendment of the water service agreement. To date, a total of 220 residential lots have been platted. Reflecting continuing housing market changes, the owner of this large property has requested amendment to the Granite Dells Estates planned area development plan. Planned area development plan. That was in your packet, so that letter is available to you. The water service agreement and to provide water for build out of the master plan as amended. The water service agreement presently contractually commits 248.5 acre feet of alternative water sufficient to service 710 single-family residential units, and provides upon final platting of the 400th unit, the owner may apply to the city for an increase in the water allocation to serve the balance of residential units proposed to be developed. As stated in attachment 1 within your packet, the owner is requesting further modification of the water service agreement to provide water for a total of 1,399 residential units, consisting of 1,090 single-family units and 309 multifamily units. This will require a total of 458.75 acre feet. The difference between the water that's vested in the existing contracts and that is requested is 210.25 acre feet. Let me change slides for a moment. maybe I'll just get to those if we really need them. The potential sources for this 210 acre feet is looking at the vacant residentially zoned tract, a reservation that holds 431.3 acre feet. With the recent action of the policy that was adopted, that has dropped by 50 acre feet. And the other pool that we might be able to consider is the city's long-term storage account, which holds approximately 200 acre feet. So that's a brief summary on this topic, and I'd like to invite Mr. Fan and or Mr. Holt to provide additional information.
Question, Mayor, if I may.
Go ahead.
So we're considering an additional 210.25 more than the original. Is that what we're talking about today?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I hate getting up here. Okay. Mike Fan, 450 Whetstein, and president of Granite Dells Estates Properties. Ms. Grazer put it out great. Her presentation is dead on. And thank you, Leslie and Craig. All my dealings with the water department has been professional, courteous, well-informed. They've been very good to work with. I guess, well, let's start with what I'll go through quickly here, and that is a brief history of why I'm here, which is probably the first thing you guys are asking on, Mike, why are you coming back to us once again? So I'll walk through that quickly. I'll talk about the economic impact that Granite Dells Estates is having currently in the city of Prescott and what those projections are. Briefly, a discussion about unintended consequences of stranded investments and unfinished projects. Some connection between retail growth and, residential growth and retail sales. And then what the current agreement is and why I'm here now versus waiting for the 400th unit. So, first thing is there's a picture of what's going on out there as we speak. So let's talk about why the history and why I'm here to begin with. In 2007 and 2008, the property was annexed in, and following was the zoning, the water allocation, and the master plan. But if you notice up in the northwest corner, you'll see a very large block of industrial and commercial land up there. At the time this was annexed into the city of Prescott and the master plan was approved, the master airport plan did not allow for residential development in this corner up here. So this entire area right here was required by the ASAP and the airport master plan to exclude residential development. As you can see, the through traffic in this area is limited, to say the least. And then the Prescott Industrial Park had 200 acres of industrial land or something to that. But I didn't have a choice. This had to be developed either commercial or industrial to meet the current plan at the time. In 2010 or 11, the methodology on residential development around the airport changed, and that was predicated by the FAA. And what happened on the crosswind runway is that restriction sucked in towards the airport. So all of a sudden, this became available based on FAA guidelines for residential development, which was the proper way to develop this property. So that's when we came back to the city in 2014 and said, we'd like to change this to residential. and we'd like to modify some of the large lots to meet the demand out there, and that is current home buyers are not looking for McMansions anymore. There's some demand for that, and we'll address some of that demand, but the majority of the demand is smaller homes and smaller lots. So we've tried to adjust to that. So that's why that's not a very good picture, but that's where we're at now. So this was phase one that's now already built, approved by the city of Prescott and built out. And here's where we've increased some density along here to meet demand and stay consistent with frankly what was previously approved. This is the plan. This is almost the plan that was approved in 2014. All of this, the adjusted master plan, the zoning, all of this was approved in 2014. One thing that wasn't done commensurately was a water services agreement that said, Mike, go out there and perform, and when you've platted your 400th lot, come back and see us again. One thing I want to point out that's in the council packets, not on these slides, is the water demand for this development that was approved in 2008, the very first approval. The water demand, because of all that industrial and commercial property, was the equivalent of, let me make sure I have the number right, 1,146 single-family homes. Let me repeat that. The original plan had a water demand of 1,146 single-family homes. The difference is what the water demand originally was did not require a 100-year assured water supply. I didn't have to have those water credits the way it was originally developed because the industrial and commercial land did not require, quote-unquote, an assured water supply. When we changed to residential development, the water demand stays almost exactly the same. What changes is what's required from ADWR to meet water credits. So let's move forward to where we're at today. Phase one was 220 lots. Of that, the permits and fees generated by the city of Prescott for just the infrastructure portion was $353,000. The taxable sales for just the infrastructure was $11.1 million worth of taxable sales. The construction of the lots, there's 220 lots. There is a little over 60 right now that are under construction. I looked at a projection over the next 60 days of 75 homes. So permits and fees, the average amount for permits and fees is $8,100 per home. That's $610,000 of revenue to the city of Prescott for permits and fees. The gross revenue, the average home price out there is $390,000. The gross revenues to date is $29,250,000. And the taxable sales, they jump up and down, depends on how much labor and materials in the house and what kind of amenities the buyer wants. But taxable sales is about $220,000 per home. So taxable sales to date, what's out there right now, $16,500,000 in taxable sales. If we're allowed to go, if I exclude the commercial and I exclude multifamily and just look at the 1,090 single-family homes, permits and fees for home construction will be a little over $8.8 million. Permits and fees for infrastructure will be almost $1.8 million. Gross revenues will be $425.1 million. Taxable sales based on those prior ratios will be just under $240 million. And taxable sales for infrastructure is about $55 million. So that's the financial impact. I wanted to touch base a little bit on tying land and water together. I think good planning in any community plans for the land and plans for the water, and they plan those two together. Right now, we're out of balance. We've planned for the land. What we haven't done is have a commensurate plan for the water. I think good planning has to include both. I think not planning the two together, you end up with a land plan that everybody's happy with. It's the land plan, or an apartment, or a commercial development, or whatever you're developing that gets started, and if it doesn't have the commensurate water and never gets it for some reason, you're going to have half-finished products. You're going to have dead-end roads. You're going to have infrastructure that's built for an entire development, but it's underutilized. It's just bad business. Talk a little bit about retail development. As we all know, rooftops drives retail. The council, about 5 or 6 years ago, Steve and Jim would know this, approved the commercial zoning and annexation just to the north of this property. Nothing's happened there yet, because retail development doesn't happen in isolation. Retail development happens where there's rooftops, and it drives that. So I believe as Granite Dells Estates gets those rooftops out there and gets that moving, I think you're also going to see the added economic benefit of retail development just north of this property on that AED property around Granite Dells Parkway interchange. And there's a big investment out there, and we are underutilizing that investment. Why am I here right now? I'm in the process of engineering phase 2, and I'm uncomfortable, frankly, but we will get to that 400th unit in the next few months. The reason I'm uncomfortable is I'm planning in consistent with what was approved in 2014, but we could run into a big roadblock, and that is not a corresponding water service agreement that corresponds with the land plan. So I'm here now to say I'd like to address it now. I'd like to discuss a path to get to where we need to be. Don't need it right away, but to discuss that path because we will plat that 400th unit. Actually, 489 units will be platted by about, I'm assuming, June or July of this next year. So we're only a few months away of having that happen and hitting that trigger. Schedule, like I say, 269 units are in phase 2. We should have it platted by about mid-2017, and that will hit the 400th unit as currently contemplated in the water service agreement. And that would include adding assured water supply, even though again, the wet water demand is very similar to what's going to occur out here anyway, I believe, if approved. But because of assured water supply credits, we need to look at a water service agreement for that portion of it. Don't need it right now. The water that is in the current plan will cover us through about 2019, but by then we need a path to achieve the rest of the water to properly develop the property. So in summary, I think the project is providing significant economic benefit to the city of Prescott. I think without planning it properly, we have the potential of underutilizing a great investment, a significant investment, both by the property owner and the city of Prescott around the Granite Dells Estates interchange. I think moving forward as quickly as possible will stimulate that retail growth and get some retail sales projects going out there. And like I said, the 400 unit trigger is we're on the eve of that. So the only thing I'm asking for right now is this council to authorize staff to say, work with Mike, find a path where what water buckets the water comes out of, what the timing of that is, and then come back to council with a proposal that says, we believe this is the proper way to move forward. And that's all I have, and can answer questions. If they're technical, I'm going to defer to Mr. Holt.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is for staff, not for Mike. Here not too long ago, maybe a year or two, the community overwhelmingly voted to support a general plan. In relationship to that general plan, the contemplation for build-out on the property is, at the time that the general plan was ratified by the public. What does that mean? What does that contemplate numbers-wise? Does the number that Mr. Fan is advocating today relate to the number that was reflected when we voted on the general plan for that piece of property?
Pro Tem Lamerson, I believe the answer would be, I'd like to check the numbers more carefully, but an immediate answer would be that the general plan would have looked at the master plan as it is now, which is 1,310. The request at this time is to increase it by 89 units.
Okay, that was question number one. And then number two, understanding that we are significantly limited in the water portfolio of alternative water to turn into permanent water or assured water. What would the contemplation be as to where the wet water would actually come from? Besides Big Chino, nobody's built that yet. Nobody's come up with a plan on how to transport the water that we, the citizens of Prescott, actually own to get it here. Is there contemplation within your department as to where that water would come from?
Yes, sir. Let me give you a couple slides. As in the memo, we discussed the vacant residentially zoned tract reservation and then the long-term storage account. So this was a slide that was brought forward November 8th, 2016 to the study, in a study session regarding the portfolio. So we're looking into this pool here within the portfolio, and it's going to be slightly different as of your last meeting, your last voting meeting, where 50 acre feet was already moved over. So it's now at 381.3 acre feet. This request is looking for 210. So that kind of gives you an order of magnitude. The other portion of the portfolio, moving out of the alternative a little bit, this is another diagram you see often. You saw it on November 8th as well, is the long-term storage account. And I can tell that's not clear for anybody on the screen, but it says 204.44 acre feet. So this request today is 210, so it would require that whole volume. So those are the areas we're looking at.
So to get beyond, above and beyond what we've already agreed to get to this point on a subsequent request, everybody else in the future would not have access to the same bucket of water.
It would be slightly different. The vacant residentially zoned tract, we're already moving that 50 acre feet per year into the general pool. So the city would look at probably maintaining a certain quantity in that pool, but yes, that would be another interested party for that supply.
Okay.
It would be the same thing here with the long-term storage account.
If I remember correctly, at Water Issues, we discussed this quite nauseam, and the issue was take it to the body, the council body as a whole,
Yes, sir.
to get a public discussion with regards to the whole body makes this decision, not 3 council members in a subcommittee. So thank you very much for that input.
Councilwoman Wilcox.
Well, everything you say makes sense, Mike, especially the part about planning the land and planning the water should go together. The questions that I still have unanswered, which probably should come from staff, are what other plans are in the works out for this area that will need water? This is somewhat related to Councilman Lemerson's question. I know part of the Deep Well Ranch is contingent upon the Big Chino being built. about a third of their water
Yes, ma'am.
service agreement or pre-annexation
Yes, ma'am.
includes that. And then I don't know the status of Arizona Eco Development's plans. I know you're negotiating, but somewhere in the mix, they may need water too. Are we at some point going to be presented with a comprehensive water allocation plan that goes beyond year to year?
Well, we do have several things in the works. So maybe I'll back up and start with some of your earlier comments. You're correct. Deep Well Ranch does have a reservation within the portfolio, 1,850 acre feet. Arizona Eco Development is working with the city regarding 375 acre feet that's held impounded currently in Watson Lake. And we'll have to see where that moves forward through all the ADWR rules on that. That's a totally separate bucket. And that's, I think, what makes water discussions challenging a little bit, because there's different state laws. The Deep Well Ranch water is alternative water supplies, and that can be worked. It's basically the checkbook of the city. They can work it within different ways. Once we start talking surface water supplies, there's a whole other set of rules in state law. Otherwise, out there is additional lands that AED holds. There's additional lands in the industrial areas. Unless it's a commercial subdivision, it wouldn't necessarily require assured water supplies. So in terms of a master plan, the last one that was done, well, I won't want to say master plan, let's say a long-term water management plan. The city had a consultant who worked on that helped bring in the information needed for the current decision and order. And that gentleman is on contract now and providing what I've called many times more slider bars. The last work that was done was one picture, what it might look like. This time we're working with it because we know there's so many variables that could change. Economies can change, ownership out there can change. But generally I would say, the workup I've done on looking at water supplies for the city has so much in contract right now, waiting for build. So it's actually in a very secure spot. There are only a few little pockets that I see here and there. I'm verifying the mapping. I don't want to bring something to you that I haven't been able to really verify across the board. But I can see that there's good coverage across the city as it exists now, and where the annexations, we're aware those are going to happen. I hope that was I able to touch on most of your questions there?
Well, a little bit. When you just talk about it and verbalize it, it's hard to follow, but it's easier to understand when it's presented in writing.
Sure.
So at some point, it would be nice to have that discussion. It does seem like our policy is the first guy to the well gets the water, right? So Mr. Fan is ready to go to proceed with his plans. He's got probably 1 or 2 years of work into it, but before he invests that money into more engineering and more infrastructure, he's asking us, are we willing to make these changes in the water budget?
Yes, ma'am. And I think it's important to know, I brought just a few items. Mr. Fan was able to show this as well when this was the original industrial area and what the residential units looked like. It was going to be 550 units with 160 workforce units, a total of 710 units, and a water requirement of 248. So then when the amendment was made, apologize if my papers have gotten out of order. We seem to have quite a few. It's been a long-standing project. Let me just turn.
10 years.
I am not complaining. I know you. But this was an interesting time. Looks like I better zoom in. Otherwise, you'll be able to see this. This is within the water service agreement. And at that time in 2007, when the original one was written, it appears to me that what I can see in the history is that the city was running up through its supplies that were within the 2005 decision order. So there was discussion here about how an allocation of residential development shall carry over from year to year, and the city really worked with this property to try to issue out 40 here and then 40 the next year and kind of just keep doing that until it built out. So when this property changed to taking the industrial out and adding more residential in this area here, then that put an additional load on the city's water portfolio. It's not a criticism by any means, it's just a reflection of what the history was. So I understand it's challenging to have it part way, but when the amendment was done in 2013, then the city did the best it could and said, okay, well, the Big Chino's not here. We can maintain the vested 248.5 acre feet. The 400th unit, we can speak some more. So we're really on that, at that point at this time. So I hope you understand. I think the city always tries to not do partial, but we're seeing that right now again, where if we don't have the Big Chino water supplies here, and we have so much out in contract and nobody's building quite yet, there was a slowdown, then we just don't have more supplies to put into contract. So it's, once again, I would like to point out, it's not a, oh, we're out of water situation, it's a matter of it's all in contract, and we can't create more water in our checkbook. I hope that helps a little bit.
That helps, thank you.
Okay.
Councilman Blair?
Yeah, that's a tough situation. Mike, I appreciate what you're doing, and I agree that the water should go kind of with the land. But on the other hand, looking at it from what Leslie just made it very clear, that we have a lot of stuff in contract, but nobody's building yet. You know, we need to protect our water as best as we can. You can see the numbers that were generated on the board, what it means to the community as far as sales tax revenue and tax revenue and those kind of things. And for us to allocate water to developments that just want to have water that goes with the land, I would say Mike needs our protection and we need his protection as much as he needs ours. And I think it needs, I would agree with his comment that staff needs to work with the developer to language through our legal department that protects not only our water, in case he sells the property, he falls on hard times, that water's not tied up for the next 20 years. If he's got a valid plan, which he's been working on that valid plan, and he's got money invested, and he's got to have water that goes with the properties to be able to market those to the builders, I would say that's what we need to work towards. But we also need to make sure that we're secure in our own being to make sure we have protection. And some of those things that we have out there in allotments right now, I'm not sure we have those protections, and I think we need to work hard with each person to make sure that we do. And I agree with Gene, you know, our water is limited, and each time we get a little bit more here, a little bit more there, and we can use some of those other credits. And you have to ask yourself as a council, is what Mike's trying to provide important to the community? And I would tell you right now, by looking at that community he's built out there, it is important to the community, or lots wouldn't be selling. So with that said, I think it would be a council that would say to staff and to Mike, you need to work together to make it happen.
Councilwoman Orr?
Well, I would agree, and Mike, it's a beautiful development. It is, you've done a great job. Maybe it's taken 10 years, but it's been worth the time.
Thank
so
you.
Congratulations on that. And the other thing I would say, I like looking to the long term on this and the connectivity that you're talking between the water and the land. Also agree with Steve. I think this also points out, once again, how important it is to get that Big Chino and get that done. I know it's on our radar and everything, but it just, again, the economic impact and economic development, and I wrote in my notes, you know, growing that revenue pie. And this, you've certainly brought the data to show the return on investment. So appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thanks, Mayor. Here again, Leslie, I go back to the general plan. The contemplations were all presented to the public, not just in '04, but again in '14, if I believe that was the last time we ratified the general plan. And this was all contemplated. Here again, it was contemplated not only to have residential and commercial interface together in different areas. We had different plans that were built into the general plan, which included such things out on Willow Creek and Willsap and ASAP and something or other sap and sappity sap sap sap. And I mean, that's the way the plan had worked, and the public agreed. The citizens of Prescott overwhelmingly supported the general plan. How do we implement the general plan is why we have you folks to try and help steer us up here into making rational decisions, okay, not irrational decisions. And part of rational decisions is tying what resources that we have to what contemplates not only generating good commercial property for tax revenue, but good residential properties with an eye on it, Mike, that commercial follows rooftops. That doesn't, but all of that has to be integrated together, and that's why we have these road plans. That's why we have these water plans, et cetera. So I appreciate staff looking forward to seeing if indeed we can come through the water resources as to how this could be made possible. I know in the alternative bucket, as we read and speak today, the water's not there. That isn't there. So what you're going to have to do is look somewhere else, and that could be in your long-term storage supplies, etc. So I'm sure that at some time here in the future, you're going to be bringing both before the water issues and this council as a whole, because we chose to have this discussion publicly with the entire council, not just the 3 people on water issues, so that we were all equally apprised of the circumstances, the benefits, and the liabilities of where we're going here in the future, because it takes all 7 of us to vote on this, not 3. So thanks for keeping us updated.
Yes, sir. We'd be happy to work with this landowner as well as all others when it comes to water supplies.
Councilman Shiska.
Thank you. Mike, appreciate you doing what you're doing. What kind of water efficiencies are you guys developing out there in that in your development?
Well, I'm not the builder, so I can't give you exact numbers and data. I can tell you that from the standpoint of the developer and the infrastructure, all of the plant life that we've planted out there, all of the landscaping is low water demand plant life trees. There is no water feature. There is no grass. Well, let me rephrase that. There's artificial turf, but there's no living grass out there. So from the infrastructure standpoint, very, very water conscious. From the builder standpoint, I know the builders that are the primary builders, Mandalay out there is the primary builder. They are low flush toilets, all of their landscaping, and I can't see in every backyard, but I don't believe there's any lawn out there that I've seen. If there is, it's very limited. All very water conscious. I believe some of them have gray water options, and people have chosen that option to use gray water. With a little bit of a grain of salt, I believe very water conscious community. One thing that's kind of cool about Granite Hills Estates is all of the water going in will be metered from landscape to every home, and all of the wastewater leaving that development is also metered. It all goes through one final manhole before it leaves and heads for the sewage treatment facility, and that we have a flow meter in that. So we're going to have some really good data as that project builds out on just how much water a single family unit in the city of Prescott is using in that development with the way they are building out and being water conscious.
Okay. Lastly, I have a question for you. Is this going to dramatically help our recharge efforts?
Well, this is an annexation that was over 250 acres, and so the water from this development will have to go to permanent recharge. So it won't be accruing within the city's long-term storage account as something they can use in the future. It'll be put towards safe yield.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So, Mike, do you think you got your answer?
Well, I think so. Is it okay to work with staff and come back to you guys with a plan?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
Great. Okay.
I think that's the right thing to do.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Next item.
Item C, presentation of acquisition of easements on Arizona State Trust lands for the purpose of trail construction.
Thank you, Mayor Council, for the opportunity to present to you today on state trust land trail easements and to talk a little bit about our methodology and how we look at providing that connectivity, as well as how we look at enhancing that user experience when it comes to trying to market our trail system and bring visitation, which brings that spending with it. First off, we like to build sustainable trails for a number of reasons. Obviously, we don't have a large amount of staff to maintain trails. We do it primarily through volunteers. So you do that through proper trail construction. Recently, I'd say the last 10 to 15 years, trail constructing has kind of taken a form of road construction in the fact that we want to build to the best possible construction methods that we can. And so this is the tactic that we use. It's called a rolling contour. We try to make it to where we've got an average of an 8% grade, even in some of the steeper areas that we have. We accomplish that through maybe some areas that'll be steeper in grade and then flatten out a little bit. But the biggest feature, I think, is that in a rolling contour, you want to make sure that you have outfall in the low areas so that the water's not accumulating on the trail, that it's running off of the trail and keeping that trail intact. Here's an example of recent trail construction in 2014 up over the landfill, and this is a picture that was taken in the same area over the course of a couple years. In 2014, we built that Sundog Ranch Trail on the right-hand side, you can see, and on the left, you'll see this picture was taken a couple days ago. That's a rolling contour, very sustainable trail. The only thing that's happened on that trail, maintenance-wise, since it was built, was people walked on it. So the methods were, it was done correctly, and so it'll sustain itself. So that's what we're looking for, is to have that type of trail in our trail system that allows us to keep a good user experience that keeps people coming back, but also limits the amount of staff time we put into any kind of maintenance. A little bit about the economic impact of outdoor recreation. Prescott, as you all know, has really put ourselves on the map as an outdoor recreation destination. Things such as the epic rides, the Whiskey Off-Road. We had a promoter who was interested and did a race on the Circle Trail this year after we finished it. I don't know how those guys do 54 miles in one shot, but there was a 54-mile, there was a half of Circle Trail, which is about like a marathon, and then there was a 10K. So we've put ourselves on the map. Our goal is to capture a larger market share of that outdoor recreation tourism as we can, and we do that through building more infrastructure. The 2014-15 visitor study that NAU did showed that 40% of the people surveyed came to Prescott to hike the trails. The recreational endurance athletes, we're on the map now for them too. They love the fact that we have the kind of terrain here that you can go from, well, the Circle Trail, for example, goes from 4,000 foot of elevation up to about 6,700 feet in that 54 miles. So we have something a lot of communities across the United States would love to have, which is a diversity in that topography, which really brings people from all over the country and other countries as well to come here and enjoy that. It attracts businesses. Just recently, Bike and Paddle magazine relocated from Montana to Prescott. And in his email to me, it was pretty much he stated that he had heard about Prescott. It was kind of an up-and-coming town, and he also recognized that he had been here a few months when he emailed me and said it's everything it was propped up to be. So we're attracting businesses. That also creates jobs. Mountain biking and those types of jobs have been created. Soul Ride is a new mountain bike company in Prescott that's doing tours now. So we're starting to get a little more of the job creation going on through this. One of the other things about this and trails in general is, we always struggle with, we have no problem with visitation from Memorial Day to Labor Day. It's always on the shoulder seasons, the Octobers, Novembers, the March and Aprils. February, ironically, is the highest visitation we have on our trails of the whole year, and I'll get to that in a minute. But anyway, we have an opportunity through outdoor recreation to prop up some of those shoulder seasons. This is one of the few things where quality of life and economic development, they share top billing, because we can build the infrastructure, create the visitation that creates those tax revenues, and at the same time the citizens who live here will improve their quality of life. So they're an efficient use of public lands and provide a high return on investment. This one I think gets overlooked quite a bit. Outdoor recreation produces get-off-the-couch spending. That comes from a personal perspective. When my wife says, get off the couch, we're going to go out and take a hike, you go out and then you're going to go somewhere and you're going to get a yogurt or something like that, a beverage of some kind. So that's spending that wouldn't happen in the community if we didn't have, whether it's softball or whatever the case might be, that opportunity for people to get out and recreate rather than stay at home and not spend money in the community. I don't expect you to read all of this. I just want to kind of show you, to acknowledge that we do take it very seriously. In my department, everything we can measure, we measure. It's very important to measure it for trends. It's very important to measure it to find out, where our strengths and weaknesses are. We have trail counters set up on the majority of our trail system. It's just an infrared counter set up at about hip high so it doesn't count the dog. And we measure how much trail visitation we get by the year. We continue to build more trail, but yet we see a higher percentage of trail use every year. So that tells me that we have not quite reached that saturation point, but we continue to see increased trail use up to the point now where I think the next slide says it. We're at 724,000 plus visits per year on the trail system. This is just some of the locations where we have those trail counters set up, and we move those around from time to time. But this tells us where people are going, what kind of experiences that they're looking for, and helps us kind of track those trends. So now I'm going to get into the proposed trail easements on Arizona or on state trust land that I would like to bring for your consideration at the voting meeting. There's three locations: the Glassford Hill Trail, which you can see Watson Lake here. This is the Peavine Trail. So it would come off of the Peavine on Arizona State Trust land, go up not quite to the top of Glassford Hill, and I'll get into that in the next slide or two, but up and then connect into the Iron King right there, which we've got some really nice views here. It provides connectivity to one of our most popular trail systems, about 70,000 trail visits on the Peavine. So this would, again, connect to that trail system. The second one is a small one, about a little over a half a mile. It'll connect the mall to the Circle Trail. 14.7 million vehicles a year go on that Highway 69. So I can imagine, a trailhead signage there that would drive people into the mall, drive business at the mall, and give people an opportunity to connect to the Circle Trail. We have had talks with the mall. We're trying to figure out logistically how we'll make the little road crossing there, but they are certainly on board with what we want to do because, again, it'll drive business to their business and help support all the way around the trail system, too. And then the last one is a 1.83 mile reroute of an existing trail that we have that is not sustainable. It's down in the creek. It's got a lot of up and down that doesn't fare very well in the weather. And the Forest Service has also acknowledged that a reroute is needed, and the green that you see is the Forest Service rerouting this part of the trail too. So while it's not a combined effort, the recognition from the Forest Service and the City of Prescott is that there's two sections of the Circle Trail that people have expressed that they really wouldn't, if they had a choice, go out and do again. This is one of them. And then over in Hokegon off of Williamson Valley Road is the other, which we're working on that too. So these are the three that will be coming before you today at the voting session. A little bit about the state trust lands process. Several steps to secure these leases. We initially pay a right of entry fee. That gives us the ability to go in there, do the surveys, the plant surveys, the archaeological surveys, all of those types of things that need to be done. Where there's a grazing lease involved, if there's concerns expressed by any of the grazing lessees, we work through those. We pay for a real estate appraisal, either in-house with Arizona State Land Department, or we can contract it out. And then we provide a survey. We've talked about this before, the trail construction, a number of times, but we have very little city staff that's dedicated to trail building or trail maintenance. It's essentially Chris Hosking. But we also have a lot of allies, a lot of other tools in the toolbox, if you will, through Prescott Mountain Bike Alliance, who does a lot of volunteer hours a year. Of course, the city's Over the Hill Gang trail volunteers, most Fridays, all Mondays, they're there for us. We have the city's community restitution program crews that we use extensively on trail systems and other things throughout the city. We also use Yavapai County adult probation crews, Eagle Scout projects. They're involved in a lot of these trail things. Backcountry horsemen have been a good partner, and then Prescott National Forest is a partner of ours in trail construction too. The project cost will not exceed $100,000. What's encompassed in that is the lease fees, along with the surveys that we need to do, plant, archaeological, all those things, and small part of that is trail construction itself. Trailheads, I just wanted to show in location of, especially the Boy Scout Turley reroute, where the trailhead locations are. We have one existing right here. It's the Turley trailhead. There's been some recent improvements to that, probably 30-plus parking spots here. The new one would be at the mall. Yet to be determined, but plenty of paved parking there for this portion of that trail connection. And then the Forest Service has a trail head over here for the Ranch Trail, Trail 62. So in this location here, there's some pretty good trailhead parking that will allow people to access the trail in several different locations. This map's a little bit busy, but if you just, the blue line is the proposed easement. I wanted to show this in this fashion. Again, I'll point out this is the Peavine Trail, Watson Lake's over here, Peavine Trail, Iron King Trail, proposed trail. I wanted to show this because this is the annexation line between Prescott and Prescott Valley, or that line in the sand, if you will, annexation line. And so we're not proposing to construct any trails over that line. However, I have met with Prescott Valley, and they share the same sentiment that we do, that we would like to make that connection to the existing trail that Prescott Valley built up to the top of Glassford. Again, one of the goals is connectivity, and part of that connectivity is connecting to our neighbors. So we would work together. We do share volunteers currently, so we would work together to get this part of the trail in. But for the purposes of what you'll be considering today, it's just that blue line, this 3.87 miles. This is a little better look at the Mall Connection Trail, short trail, 0.55 miles. Really pretty easy to build trail, but again, we like it when we can drive business to the businesses and also, provide access to the trail. And then this is a slope analysis that we did for the Arizona State Land Department. When they determine the lease, whether it's going to be a 50-year lease or a 10-year lease, the 50-year leases are generally acknowledged to be residential in nature. They're generally acknowledged to be, nothing's unbuildable, less buildable. And so as part of that process, we did this slope analysis. So when you see the red lines, you're talking about a 40% grade, a steep grade going up to this is the ranch right here. The closest residential unit is about here, which is about 1,300 feet or a quarter of a mile from this trail. And then here is the Forest Service's proposed alignment, and I think the closest on the Forest Service portion of that trail is 1,100 feet, but about 300 feet below it. So as you can see from the coloring on that topo, it's a pretty steep grade going up that hill. So with that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer that. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to give you a little background.
Councilman Blair.
Yeah, Joe, I received a letter from the Homeowners Association as well as the developer of the ranch at Prescott. Have you resolved those issues out there?
To the best I could. I met again with the Homeowners Association on Monday, a week from this Monday. And they had I met with them in May, worked on some realigning that trail, which they had requested, which we did. Met with them again a little over a week ago, and they were pleased and happy that we were able to relocate the trail even further away than what they had requested. There is a property owner that had requested, separate from the HOA, that they would like the trail to be at least a quarter of a mile away from their home, and we've been able to comply with that request too, on, again, the city's portion of the trail, which is here. This is Forest Service property. The red line you see is the Forest Service trail. This point is about 1,100 feet and 317 feet below this home, so it's not quite the quarter of a mile, but we have been able to make those adjustments for those homeowners.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Wilcox.
Joe, I really appreciate all the work you put into this. I know it's taken many, 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 many months. And as a trail user myself, I can tell that the thought and attention paid to trail design makes a huge difference in our ability to draw in outdoor recreationists to Prescott. They really like our trails because they're easy to walk on, they're easy to find, you don't get lost. We have great trail maps. And I really appreciate the work that you and Chris Hoskins do to make those trails accessible to a wide range of outdoor enthusiasts. And easements on state land makes a lot of sense. These are great connections.
And George, and you too, George.
I'll take the opportunity after that comment to brag a little bit on Chris. Chris has great vision, great trail building skills, and he was invited to go to the International Mountain Bike Association in Bentonville, Arkansas, and be a presenter on trail construction. So we're pretty well acknowledged. We're lucky to have the team we have.
Councilwoman Orr.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to the Over the Hill gang, and because the work they do. I know, how many do you have now, George, in the Over Hill?
Just under 300.
Yeah, that's amazing. And we could never begin to do this work without them. The other thing, I want to thank you, Joe, for working with the homeowners, because I also got a couple of calls on that. So thank you for making those adjustments.
Any other questions, comments from the council? We still got a bit to go, so I think I'm not going to take any public comment on this. We'll move on to the next item.
Item D, discussion of the city favoring private product vendors utilizing American goods in the procurement selection process and an Attorney General opinion request regarding Buy American.
You want me to speak to that, Mayor? Yeah, I asked that this be put on the agenda to discuss between myself and Councilman Blair. We had discussed this, and I had asked that this be brought to the council body as a whole. I would like a interpretation from the Attorney General of the state of Arizona if we as a community can restrict the expenditures of public money whenever possible to purchasing from American suppliers and manufacturers for product we're using American taxpayers' dollars to spend on behalf of the city of Prescott. And that's why I ask it to be put on the council agenda to be discussed by the body as a whole and get an interpretation from the Attorney General on behalf of the body as a whole, not on my behalf.
Councilwoman Wilcox.
I know this question has come up at least 2 or 3 times since I've been on the council. John, I'm wondering, Palladini, hello?
I'm listening.
Okay.
I'm actually looking.
All right. What is the likelihood of the Attorney General concluding that the Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution would prohibit us from restricting expenditures of public money?
Well, let me just answer that. I'm going to object. It's a compound question. Sorry. No, first of all, we cannot, or put it the other way, the Attorney General will not issue an AG opinion to a city. It has to be from a legislator or a school district. So to the extent that this question is posed to the Attorney General, or if the council, a majority of the council wants an opinion like this, the direction would have to be to go to one of our elected state officials, one of our legislators, to ask to pose that question. I was just looking up on Google the search federal government Buy American requirement, and I see Buy American Act, government contracting, which is a U.S. government post, and it was blocked by our filter. So for some reason, we don't like the federal government apparently here.
The Chinese hackers again.
There is, let me just put it this way, there is a Buy American Act that the federal government binds itself to. For instance, DOD has a Buy American Act or Buy American requirement that that limits certain purchases. However, there's a bunch of exceptions to that. For instance, what constitutes an American-made vehicle, for instance? Is it assembled here, or how much percentage of the parts? There's a lot of complexities to the issue, but I don't think, get to your question, I don't think it triggers Commerce Clause, because that's among or between the states, and not necessarily between the United States and, say, a foreign country. So I don't think Commerce Clause would apply to the issue. The sort of question I think that would be posed to the AG is there some sort of preference problem? As we've talked about in the past, we are prohibited under Arizona law, both I think Arizona Constitution, and a court case that said that there was a local preference statute that's essentially unconstitutional about buying local as sort of somewhat discriminatory. I don't think that applies to Buy American, because to the extent that Commerce Clause or Equal Protection Clause wouldn't necessarily apply to a foreign manufacturer. All that being said, is there's complexities to Buy American it's not cut and dry, especially when you're talking about vehicles or something like that, because the question is where a vehicle is made is what does that mean? Because obviously parts and pieces are made in different countries and they may be assembled here, or the pieces and parts are made here and assembled elsewhere. Is that an American made? So bottom line is, though, you'd have to go through one of your legislators, one or more legislators, to ask that, and then I think the issue is going to be how you frame the question and what that means. But I don't think there's any prohibition as far as Commerce Clause. And I just say this, the council could sort of set a sort of general or broad Buy American preference and direct staff to do that, and I don't think that would be a problem without going through the AG. But if you want an AG's opinion, the route would be to go through a legislator.
I think the problem comes when we try to define what we mean by Buy American, because as you say, the final assembly point might be someplace in the United States, but many of the parts come from all over the world. We live in a global economy.
I'll give you a real sort of bad example, but we take lumber, cut down lumber from Oregon, ship it to China, they mill it, and then they ship it back, and we buy. It's American grown, but it's sort of manufactured or milled in China and then shipped back, and because the labor costs and the regulations are so different there, and so even with the shipping, it's still cheaper. So that's where it does get complicated in terms of what's American made.
I think a final component is whether it's made in the United States. And then a good example would be in the window covering industry. A lot of those parts come from China. A lot of the materials come from Indonesia and Korea and Vietnam, but the final product is made in the USA, and they market that very proudly. So they're employing people to put the final product together, and I think that's probably what we need to look at.
And I mean, I could just propose this. I'd be happy for our office to take a look at sort of what the federal government's Buy American Act requirements are in terms of what that means. And unfortunately, the limits on federal government procurement are different than what's on states and municipalities in terms of how the law applies, because the federal government has a lot of preferences for small businesses or persons with disabilities or minority owned, those kinds of things, which state and local governments don't necessarily have the same ability to actually use those procurement tools, because obviously sometimes the federal government simply exempts itself out from laws that it imposes on other people. But we'd be happy to take a look at it if you want us to come back with a report to the council to sort of develop, if the council as a whole wants to help develop some sort of just broad policy without making it sort of an ordinance or code, which I think is very complicated. But if the council wants us to look at sort of developing some sort of broad direction or policy, we'd be happy to take a look at it. And again, look at what the federal government does in terms of its, how broad or narrow it's interpreted by by laws that affect the Buy American Act, which is, I think, what we're talking about.
John, thank you. My reason for asking you about this to begin with was, of course, I don't want to have a policy here where we get in trouble from the Attorney General's office because they're quick to take us to court over some of the most ridiculous things. So if indeed we invoke some sort of a internal policy that says Buy American first, I don't want to have that misconstrued as to we want to discriminate against Chinese. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we want to support Americans. Americans first. And that was my point. And if that's an internal policy that my fellow council would choose to go down, I'm more than happy to try and move this forward to a legislator. On the other hand, if the rest of the council says, no, it's not important, we don't care about Americans, okay, take that one, all right? But I'm just sharing it with you. We have a newly elected president that takes place here pretty soon that says, let's put America first. And I don't disagree with that.
Right, and I can tell you, the Buy American Act was adopted, I'm just reading off, thank God for Wi-Fi, 1933, and signed by President Hoover. So it's been around for a long time. There is a Buy America Act that has to do with surface transportation assistance that was adopted in 83. So, I mean, this notion is out there, and if it's important to y'all, and I'm going to quote Mayor Pro Tem Lamson, if you want to be pro-American, then we can go ahead and, I'm just kidding, we can go ahead and do a report to you and get it back, and then we can always come back and discuss it if that's your preference.
Why don't you go ahead and do that?
Yeah, got it.
Mayor Pro Tem, you got anything else you want to?
No, I think we need to go get prepared for our voting session now.
Get one more thing.
Okay, I think we still got one more thing here, but so do you want to pursue this with any of our legislators?
Oh, I don't mind pursuing it. I don't mind pursuing it at all.
Do you want our legal department to frame the question to the attorney?
Yeah, but I want to, here again, this is a council body. Every one of us duly elected. I want whatever we send forward to a legislator that might be forwarded to the Attorney General. I doubt we need it, according to John. But I want the body as a whole to say, yeah, this is our position. We support America first.
Okay, do I have a consensus from the council here to move forward on this?
Amen.
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. Could you go ahead and draft up the question that we can give to the legislator?
We'll work something up.
Appreciate it. Anything else on this? Okay, next item.
Item E, Strategic Plan Committee update.
Thank you, Mayor. As you know, Mayor Oberg appointed me chairman of the Strategic Planning Oversight Committee and appointed Councilman Shushka, Councilwoman Orr, as part of this committee. Our job mainly is to keep the city manager on task with respect to the strategic plan that the council worked on in the last few months. And our number one goal is the hardest one, and that is to stabilize the general fund. So I wanted to give you a little update on where we are, what we've been doing. We had an organizational meeting on November 18th to kind of map out the dates and how we were going to go about keeping the city manager on track. And then we met again on December 9th and threw around a lot of options for stabilizing the general fund, one of which is, of course, getting rid of the debt that has to be paid out of the general fund. And we decided that it would be a good idea if we heard from some key stakeholders in the community. So we invited them all to lunch and had a very good discussion December 16th and heard from people mainly in the business community, hospitality, car dealer, restaurateur, RV dealer, quite a variety of people. And not everyone agreed, but we got some very good ideas, some things that we had not thought of. In one of our meetings, we did bounce around a lot of options, one of which was privatizing solid waste. So it might be something eventually that we'd come back to, maybe not. Then we met again on the 19th, yesterday, to try to gain some more focus on putting together all the comments that we'd heard. And we would like to have a workshop with the council on January 5th to present some of these options and talk about the pros and cons and the timing of how we would take the action steps to implement these strategies. There are quite a few things we've talked about, and the minutes of our meetings are available. There was a presentation put together by Mark Woodfill, which put numbers to some of the options so people can see how much we would be able to raise with different types of revenue generating mechanisms, and how much we would be able to preserve in the general fund to keep it stabilized so that we can keep funding the things that we enjoy now in Prescott. High level of public safety, protection, library, recreation, and general governmental services. And then January 13th, we're hoping to come back to the council.
January 10th.
Sorry, January 10th. We're hoping to come back to the council with a recommendation. But before we do that, we want to consult one more time with the stakeholders group that we met with and see what they think. We may have another meeting, or we may do that via email or telephone to be more efficient. But you can look forward to hearing about this January 5th and January 10th.
Any comments, questions on the update?
I would have one.
Okay, go ahead.
I would hope at some point in the discussions that somebody reaches out to the Citizens Tax Committee and involves them in the conversation.
They were at the
Absolutely.
focus meeting.
We plan to have a separate meeting with them.
But they were at the focus meeting. They were part of the group.
Yes, there was a representative.
Chris Kootenai was there.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, that gives us a little time to kind of orient ourselves for our voting meeting at 3 o'clock. Thank you all for coming. This meeting's adjourned.
You got time to go powder your nose.